December 27th, 1945, Heidelberg, Germany. The winter sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets as Captain Robert Miller walked through the partially rebuilt historic district, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air as he adjusted the collar of his uniform against the biting cold. The once proud German university town now stood as a symbol of fragile recovery, its medieval architecture largely spared from aerial attacks, but its spirit dimmed by defeat, hunger, and uncertainty. General Friedrich Hoffmann watched from his study window, believing the arrangement he had orchestrated would be the perfect humiliation for the overly idealistic American officer who had been assigned to oversee cultural reconstruction in their sector. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is a tale of how presumptions about beauty and worth, hardened by years of conflict, would transform through an unexpected connection, revealing how the deepest human needs often transcend both national divisions and superficial judgments. Captain Robert Miller had been a professor of European literature at Columbia University before the war pulled him from his comfortable academic life. At 36, he was older than many of the men under his command, his dark hair already showing traces of premature grey at the temples. His wire-rimmed glasses and thoughtful demeanour often made German officials mistake him for a diplomatic attaché rather than a military officer. In truth, he was both, part of the specialized personnel tasked with rebuilding Germany's cultural institutions, while ensuring they were purged of dangerous ideological influences. "The General has requested your presence at his residence tomorrow evening, sir," Lieutenant James Cooper informed him as they walked through the former administrative district. "Apparently, he's hosting a small gathering to discuss the university reopening plans." Miller nodded, adjusting his cap. "Hoffmann is cooperating, then? That's unexpected." "Yes, sir. He specifically asked for you by name." "Interesting." Miller's brow furrowed. General Friedrich Hoffmann had been a complicated figure during their negotiations. As the former regional commander, who had surrendered the Heidelberg area without a fight, thereby saving the ancient city from destruction, he maintained significant influence among the local population. Yet his proud bearing and thinly veiled contempt for the occupying forces had made him a difficult partner in reconstruction efforts. "Word has it he's finally accepting the situation," Cooper continued. "Even mentioned his daughter might provide some musical entertainment. She studied at the conservatory before everything. Well, before." "I didn't realize he had family," Miller replied. "His file only mentioned his wife passed during a bombing of Frankfurt in '44. "One daughter," Cooper confirmed. "Never seen her myself. Apparently, she's kept out of public view. Not exactly a social butterfly from what the locals say." What neither man knew was that General Hoffmann's invitation was not born of cooperation, but carefully calculated insult, a performance designed to remind the American of German cultural superiority, while simultaneously embarrassing him in front of the local elites who would be present. The Hoffmann residence stood on the hillside overlooking the Neckar River, a 19th-century stone mansion that had once housed university administrators. Though somewhat diminished by coal shortages and rationing, it maintained an air of faded elegance that contrasted sharply with the practical military quarters the Americans had established in the former hotel downtown. General Friedrich Hoffmann, still straight-backed at 62 despite everything he had endured, made final preparations for his evening's subtle revenge. A career military man from the old Prussian tradition, he had served with distinction in the Great War before reluctantly accepting the new regime that rose in its aftermath. While he had privately harbored reservations about many actions taken during the recent conflict, his sense of duty and patriotism had kept him in service. Now, in defeat, his pride was all he had left. "Is everything arranged, Elsa?" he called, hearing his daughter's footsteps in the hallway. "Yes, father," she replied, her voice soft but clear as she entered his study. "The piano has been tuned, and I've prepared the Bach and Beethoven selections you requested." Elsa Hoffmann was 28 years old, tall and angular, with none of the soft roundness considered fashionable. Her brown hair was pulled back severely from a high forehead, and her features were strong. A prominent nose, determined chin, and unusually intense grey eyes behind wire-framed spectacles. What might have been considered handsome in a man made her appear austere and forbidding as a woman. Years of scholarly isolation had left her manner formal, her conversation stilted, except when discussing music or literature. "Good," the general nodded approvingly, "and you'll wear the blue dress." "If you wish it," she replied, though her discomfort was evident. The dress had been her mother's, designed for a woman with a fuller figure and more conventional beauty. On Elsa it hung awkwardly, emphasizing rather than disguising her angular frame. "I do wish it," he said firmly. "These Americans fancy themselves cultured, especially this Captain Miller. I want him to see what true European refinement looks like, and also what it does not." He smiled thinly at his own cruel joke. Elsa understood her father's intention immediately, but said nothing. She had long ago accepted her role in his household, the brilliant but unmarriageable daughter, useful for her intellectual capabilities, but an ongoing disappointment in her failure to secure an advantageous match. The war had ended any such prospects permanently, leaving her to serve as her father's hostess and caretaker. "This Miller," she asked cautiously, "what is he like?" "Arrogant, like all of them," Hoffman sniffed. "Thinks because he read a few German books in university, he understands our culture. Fancies himself an intellectual, always going on about cultural preservation and restoration of academic freedom." He straightened his civilian jacket, the best he could manage since his uniforms had been confiscated. "I've invited several former university colleagues as well. It should be quite educational for our American friend." What General Hoffman failed to understand was that Captain Robert Miller was not the typical occupation officer. Raised in rural Pennsylvania by a widowed mother who worked as a librarian, Miller had grown up surrounded by books in a house where physical appearance was far less important than intellectual curiosity. His own plain features and scholarly demeanor had taught him early that conventional attractiveness was often the shallowest measure of human worth. As Miller dressed for the evening in his quarters, Lieutenant Cooper handed him a thin dossier. "Background on the other guests, sir. Mostly former academics from the university, all cleared by intelligence, though a few had party memberships. Required for their positions, most likely," Miller commented, scanning the list. "No hardliners here, just people trying to survive." He paused at a notation regarding Elsa Hoffman. The daughter was a concert pianist? "Studied at Leipzig Conservatory," Cooper confirmed. "Apparently quite talented, though she never performed publicly after completing her studies. Returned to care for her mother during her illness and remained with her father afterward." Miller nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting family. The general seems a complicated man, proud but pragmatic enough to surrender rather than sacrifice the city." "Saving his own skin, more likely," Cooper remarked cynically. "Perhaps," Miller allowed, "but the result was the same. Heidelberg survives, and now we have the chance to restore one of Europe's oldest universities." He closed the file. "That's worth an uncomfortable dinner, at the very least." The evening began precisely as General Hoffman had planned. Captain Miller was greeted cordially but coolly, introduced to former university administrators and local officials who responded to his earnest questions about academic reconstruction with polite but minimal engagement. The conversation flowed in rapid German whenever possible, switching to halting English only when directly addressing the American, a subtle exclusion that did not go unnoticed by Miller, though he gave no sign of offense. The dining room was chilly despite the small fire, wartime fuel shortages still affecting even privileged households. The meal was simple but formally presented: potato soup, dark bread, and a small portion of preserved meat, served on fine china that had survived the conflict. Wine flowed more generously, the region's vineyards having endured better than its grain fields. It was during the soup course that Elsa Hoffman made her entrance, deliberately late by her father's instruction. The conversation paused as she appeared in the doorway, the ill-fitting blue dress making her appear even more angular, her expression stiff with discomfort at being displayed. My daughter finally joins us," General Hoffman announced with exaggerated pride. "Captain Miller, may I present Elsa Hoffman, graduate of the Leipzig Conservatory and my most treasured possession." The introduction was designed to emphasize her as an object, a cultural artifact rather than a person, and Miller caught the slight wince that crossed Elsa's features at her father's words. What the general did not anticipate was Miller's genuine smile as he rose from his chair. "Fräulein Hoffmann," he said in careful German, "I'm honored to meet you. Your father tells me you're a pianist. I've always envied those with musical talent." "You speak German," she responded, surprised both by his language skills and the sincere interest in his expression. "Poorly, I'm afraid," he replied with a self-deprecating smile, still in German. "I studied literature, not conversation. Please forgive my academic pronunciation." "Your accent is Bavarian," she observed, taking her seat across from him. "Did you study in Munich?" "For a semester in '36, not long enough to properly learn, but enough to fall in love with the language." General Hoffmann's plan had already begun to falter. He had expected awkwardness, discomfort, perhaps even poorly disguised dismay from the American upon meeting his plain daughter in her unflattering attire. Instead, Miller seemed genuinely engaged, his attention focused on her words rather than her appearance. The other guests exchanged subtle glances, sensing the general's displeasure. Throughout dinner, Miller directed thoughtful questions to Elsa about music, genuinely curious about her training and preferences. Though initially hesitant, she gradually warmed to the conversation, her natural intelligence and deep knowledge becoming evident as she spoke of Bach's mathematical precision and Beethoven's emotional range. Her features, animated by passion for her subject, transformed subtly, not into conventional beauty, but into something more interesting, authentic presence. "You must play for us after dinner," one of the former professors suggested, glancing at their host for approval. "Yes," General Hoffmann agreed, his original plan still salvageable. "Elsa will demonstrate proper German musical interpretation, perhaps something challenging enough to impress our American guest." The implied condescension wasn't lost on Miller, but his response betrayed no offense. "I would be delighted. Music transcends our political divisions, doesn't it? One of the few things that still belongs equally to all of us." After dinner, the party moved to the drawing room where a grand piano stood beside tall windows, overlooking the darkened river valley. Elsa took her seat at the instrument, her discomfort at being displayed giving way to confidence as her hands touched the keys. She began with Bach, a complex fugue that showcased technical precision, her long fingers moving with practiced certainty across the keyboard. Miller watched, transfixed not by her appearance but by the transformation that occurred as she played. The severe young woman became fluid, expressive, her body swaying slightly with the music's movement. When she finished the Bach, she paused, then without announcement began Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, not the famous melodic first movement that amateurs attempted, but the technically demanding third movement that revealed true mastery. When she finished, the room remained silent for several moments before applause broke the spell. Miller's appreciation was genuine and evident, much to General Hoffmann's annoyance. "Magnificent," Miller said simply. "You play with both technical precision and genuine feeling, a rare combination." Color touched Elsa's normally pale cheeks. "You know music, then?" "Only as a devoted listener," he admitted. "My mother insisted on concert attendance from childhood. She believed music built character." "A wise woman," Elsa replied. General Hoffmann, seeing his plan for embarrassment failing completely, intervened. "Captain Miller, perhaps you'd like to hear Elsa's views on the university's music department reconstruction. She has strong opinions on what should be prioritized." It was a trap, of course, setting his daughter up to make demands that would seem unreasonable given current resources. But again, Miller surprised them. "I'd value that insight enormously," he responded sincerely. "We have limited resources, and I'd rather allocate them based on expert knowledge rather than administrative convenience." For the next hour, the conversation revolved around practical aspects of rebuilding Heidelberg's cultural institutions. Elsa, initially hesitant, gradually revealed her comprehensive understanding of not just music, but literature and academic administration. Her suggestions were practical, acknowledging resource limitations while preserving essential cultural elements. As the evening concluded, Miller thanked his host with perfect courtesy. "A most educational evening, General Hoffman. Your hospitality is appreciated, and your daughter's musical talent is extraordinary." The general's response was stiff. "We do what we can in difficult circumstances, Captain." "Of course," Miller nodded, then turned to Elsa. "Fräulein Hoffman, I'm establishing a committee to inventory and preserve the university's musical archives. Your expertise would be invaluable if your father could spare you one afternoon next week." Before the general could intervene, Elsa answered, "I would be honored to assist, Captain Miller." As Miller departed into the cold December night, General Hoffman closed the door with barely contained frustration. His attempt to humiliate the American had backfired completely, and worse, had opened the door to ongoing contact with his daughter. "You seemed quite taken with the American," he observed coldly as Elsa prepared to retire for the evening. "He was knowledgeable and respectful," she replied carefully, "unlike many officers we've encountered." "Don't be fooled by superficial courtesy, Elsa," the general warned. "These people are not our friends, regardless of how they present themselves. They're here to dismantle and remake our society in their image." She met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps. But if I can help preserve our musical heritage by cooperating, isn't that worth some compromise?" The general had no immediate answer. His daughter had always been obedient, accepting her limited role in his household without complaint. This small assertion of independent thought was unexpected and troubling. For Captain Miller, the evening had been revealing in ways General Hoffman never intended. As he reported to his commanding officer the following morning, Major William Harrington, he focused on the practical outcomes. Several of the former faculty members seemed genuinely interested in reopening discussions, Miller explained, reviewing his notes. And the general's daughter could be extremely helpful with the cultural preservation efforts. She has intimate knowledge of the region's musical collections. Major Harrington raised an eyebrow. "Hoffman's daughter, I've heard she's a bit of a, well, not exactly a social success." Miller looked up sharply. "She's highly educated and extremely talented. Precisely the type of German citizen we should be engaging with. No troubling political entanglements, deep cultural knowledge and practical skills." "Easy, Professor." Harrington held up his hands using Miller's pre-war nickname. "I'm not questioning your judgment. Just surprised Hoffman would allow his daughter to work with us. He's not exactly embraced cooperation so far." "People surprise you," Miller replied simply. "Sometimes it takes the right approach to find common ground." The following week, Elsa Hoffman arrived at the former administrative building, where the Americans had established their cultural affairs office. She had dressed carefully in her most professional attire, a simple grey skirt and white blouse, her hair neatly arranged though still severe. The building bustled with activity, American personnel and German civilians navigating complex reconstruction logistics together. Lieutenant Cooper escorted her to Miller's office, his curiosity evident. "Captain's been looking forward to your assistance. Fräulein Hoffmann, he speaks very highly of your musical knowledge." Miller rose as she entered, genuine pleasure in his greeting. "Thank you for coming. We're facing quite a challenge with the archives." He gestured to stacks of crates lining one wall. "These were removed from the university for safekeeping before the worst of the bombing. Now we need to properly identify and catalogue everything before restoration." For the next several hours, they worked side by side, examining manuscripts and rare scores, Elsa's expertise proving invaluable in identifying significant works and proper storage requirements. Miller treated her with professional respect, soliciting her opinions and implementing her suggestions without question. As afternoon faded toward evening, Miller noticed her increasing comfort in his presence. The stiff formality gradually gave way to occasional smiles and even a small laugh when he mistranslated a musical term. "You must think us very foolish," she said suddenly as they carefully repacked a box of handwritten scores. "Why would I think that?" Miller asked, genuinely puzzled. "The dinner party," she explained, not meeting his eyes. "My father's little performance. Surely you understood what he was doing." Miller was silent for a moment, considering his response. "Your father is proud. Defeat is difficult for anyone, but especially for men of his generation and position." "That's very diplomatic," she observed, but not an answer. He smiled slightly. If you're asking whether I recognize that he intended to make me uncomfortable by parading his socially awkward daughter before me, then yes, I understood. What he failed to realize is that I find superficial social judgments tedious and uninteresting. Her eyes widened slightly at his directness. Most people are not so honest. I've found honesty saves considerable time, he replied. Your father sees you as a disappointment because you don't conform to conventional standards of feminine appeal. I see you as remarkably accomplished, intelligent, and talented. Which perspective seems more accurate to you? The bluntness of his assessment left her momentarily speechless. No one had ever addressed her father's attitude so directly, nor countered it so simply. You're a very unusual American, she finally said. And you're a very unusual German, he countered with a small smile. Perhaps that's why we work well together. When General Hoffman learned of his daughter's ongoing work with the American Cultural Affairs Office, his reaction was predictably negative. You've become their collaborator now, he demanded over dinner in their increasingly chilly home. I'm helping preserve our cultural heritage, she replied evenly. Isn't that what you always taught me was most important? The eternal German spirit expressed through our greatest artists? Not when it serves their propaganda purposes, he retorted. They'll use you to show how benevolent their occupation is, how they're saving German culture, rather than controlling it. Elsa set down her fork carefully. Captain Miller has been nothing but respectful. He values expertise and treats our cultural treasures with appropriate reverence. Would you prefer these materials be catalogued by someone who cannot tell Bach from Beethoven? I would prefer you remember where your loyalties should lie, the general responded coldly. My loyalty is to the music, father, she said quietly, as it has always been. The winter of 1945 gave way to early 1946, one of the coldest and harshest in European memory. Food remained scarce, fuel even scarcer, and the initial optimism of liberation had faded into the grinding reality of occupation. Yet amid these hardships, the cultural reconstruction efforts continued, providing purpose and rare moments of normalcy. Twice weekly, Elsa worked alongside Captain Miller, their professional relationship gradually warming into cautious friendship. She found in him something she had rarely encountered, someone who valued her for her mind rather than judging her for her appearance. He, in turn, appreciated her precision, her deep knowledge, and her increasingly evident dry humor that emerged as she grew comfortable in his presence. By February, they had established a small reading room where salvaged books and scores could be properly examined and catalogued. Officially, it served the cultural preservation mission. Unofficially, it became their shared sanctuary, a neutral territory where nationality mattered less than shared intellectual curiosity. I've been meaning to ask, Miller said one grey afternoon as they worked. Why did you never perform professionally? Your talent certainly warranted it. Elsa continued examining the score before her, not looking up. My mother became ill, just as I completed my studies. Then the situation in Europe deteriorated. Concerts seemed frivolous. And now? She glanced up, surprised by the question. Now? There are hardly concert halls functioning, let alone audiences with resources for tickets. That will change, he said confidently. Germany will rebuild. Culture will return. When it does, will you perform? She considered this seriously. I haven't thought beyond survival for a long time, Captain Miller. Robert, he corrected gently. After 3 months of Bach discussions, surely we can use first names. A small smile touched her lips. Robert, then. And no, I don't imagine performance is in my future. I'm better suited to preservation than presentation. Because of how you look? He asked directly. Her head snapped up, eyes widening at his bluntness. That's very American of you. To ask uncomfortable questions directly? Yes, I suppose it is. She was silent for several moments, carefully closing the score before her. Concert pianists are expected to be part of the performance visually as well as musically. I was informed by several instructors that while my technical ability was excellent, my stage presence was just lacking. Because you didn't fit their narrow conception of female beauty, he clarified. She met his gaze directly. Yes, though they couched it in terms like audience engagement and visual harmony. "That's their loss," he said simply, "and the audience's." "You are unusual," she repeated her earlier assessment, but this time with a genuine smile. As February turned to March, the political situation shifted. Tensions between the former allies were increasing, transforming the occupation from a cooperative peacekeeping mission into something more complex and fraught. New directives arrived regularly, emphasizing security concerns over cultural reconstruction. "They're scaling back our projects," Miller informed Elsa one afternoon, frustration evident in his voice. "Redirecting resources to military priorities." "The cold never really ended, did it?" she observed, reference to the winter giving way to deeper meaning. "Just changed form." He nodded, understanding her implication perfectly. "I've requested continued support for the university archives specifically, but I can't guarantee approval. Their work continued under increasing constraints. Fuel allocations for heating were reduced, forcing them to work in coats and gloves. Staff assistance was redirected to security operations, leaving them increasingly alone in their preservation efforts." For General Hoffman, these shifts confirmed his cynical expectations. "You see," he told Elsa over their increasingly meager evening meal, "their cultural concern was always a facade. Power is their true interest, as it is for all conquerors." "Robert is fighting to maintain the program," she defended, then realized her slip into familiarity. The general's eyes narrowed. "Robert, you're on first-name terms with this American now." "We've worked closely for months," she replied evenly. "Professional respect has developed." "Professional," he repeated skeptically. "Is that why you return from these sessions looking more alive than I've seen you in years? Do you think I'm blind, Elsa, or merely stupid?" "Neither, Father," she said quietly. "I think you're afraid. We all are. The world has changed irrevocably, and none of us knows what comes next. Finding moments of meaningful work and human connection seems sensible in such uncertainty, doesn't it?" The general had no immediate response to this unexpected philosophical turn. His daughter had always been intelligent, but rarely assertive. Something was changing in her, and he wasn't certain he approved. By April, the University Reconstruction Committee had made sufficient progress to plan a small symbolic reopening ceremony. The music department would host a modest concert featuring surviving faculty and promising students, demonstrating cultural continuity despite everything that had occurred. "We need a centerpiece," Miller explained during a planning meeting, "something that represents the endurance of German cultural achievement without political overtones." "Bach," Elsa suggested immediately. "The Goldberg Variations, complex enough to demonstrate serious musical commitment, universally respected, and completely removed from nationalist associations." "Perfect," Miller agreed, "but who will perform it? The variations require exceptional skill." The committee members exchanged glances. Professor Weber, former department chair, cleared his throat. "Fräulein Hoffmann is the most qualified pianist available to us. Her interpretation is exemplary." Elsa stiffened. "I don't perform publicly." "This isn't about performance for applause," Professor Weber countered gently. "It's about cultural continuity, demonstrating that despite everything, the music endures." Miller watched her carefully, saying nothing. This had to be her choice, not influenced by his obvious preference. After a long moment, she nodded once, curtly. "For the university, then, not for display." The preparations consumed the next 2 weeks. The university's small recital hall required extensive cleaning and minor repairs. Programs were printed on the back of repurposed administrative forms, paper being too precious to waste. Word spread through academic circles, generating modest excitement among the cultural community that had survived the conflict. For Elsa, the prospect of public performance after so many years brought both anxiety and unexpected satisfaction. She practiced diligently on the conservatory's best remaining piano, working through the complex variations with mathematical precision and growing emotional depth. Miller often found reasons to visit during her practice sessions, sitting quietly in the back of the empty hall, listening as she refined her interpretation. Sometimes she would pause, sensing his presence, and they would discuss particular passages or historical context. Their conversations expanded beyond music to literature, philosophy, and cautiously to personal history. My mother believed music was the highest form of human expression, Miller shared one evening as twilight darkened the high windows. She saved for months to take me to Philadelphia for concert performances. We'd sit in the cheapest seats, but she said the music sounded the same everywhere in the hall. "She sounds wonderful," Elsa commented, her hands resting lightly on the silent keys. "She was," he agreed. Widowed young, running a small-town library on minimal wages, but determined that her son would understand beauty despite their circumstances. He smiled at the memory. "She would have appreciated your Bach immensely." "And your father?" she asked carefully. "Died in the Great War before I was born. Spanish flu in a military camp. I know him only through her stories." She nodded, understanding. "My mother loved music too. She played a little, though never professionally. She encouraged my studies when my father would have preferred more conventional accomplishments." "Conventional has never suited you," Miller observed. A small smile touched her lips. "No, I suppose not." As the concert date approached, tensions in the Hoffman household increased proportionally. The general had initially forbidden his daughter's participation, only reluctantly conceding when Professor Weber personally intervened, emphasizing the cultural significance of the event. "You'll be used as their symbol," he warned Elsa the evening before the performance. "The conquered German providing entertainment for the victorious Allies." "Or," she countered with unusual assertiveness, "I'll be demonstrating that some aspects of human achievement transcend political conflicts. Isn't that worth doing?" The day of the concert arrived with unexpected April sunshine, warming the ancient university buildings. The recital hall, though showing signs of wartime deprivation, had been made presentable with early spring flowers gathered from the hillsides arranged in simple vases. The audience was a curious mixture. American officers in formal uniforms, German academics in their best remaining clothes, and a small contingent of students eager for any sign of returning normalcy. Miller, supervising final arrangements, caught sight of General Hoffman entering stiffly at the last moment, taking a seat near the back. Their eyes met briefly across the room, the general's gaze challenging, Miller's calmly acknowledging. The concert began with student performances, brief, technically adequate pieces that demonstrated continuing educational function. Faculty members followed with more accomplished selections, each met with enthusiastic applause from the audience, hungry for cultural nourishment after years of deprivation. Finally, Professor Weber stepped forward to introduce the main presentation. To conclude our program, we are privileged to present Johann Sebastian Bach's Goldberg Variations, performed by Elsa Hoffman, graduate of the Leipzig Conservatory. Elsa appeared from the side entrance, wearing the one formal dress she still possessed, a simple black gown that had belonged to her mother, altered to fit her taller, more angular frame. She acknowledged the audience with a brief nod, then took her seat at the piano, adjusting the bench with practiced precision. For a moment, her gaze lifted, scanning the audience until she found Miller seated midway back. He offered a small nod of encouragement. Then her attention turned completely to the keyboard before her, her back straightening, hands poised above the keys. The opening aria began, deceptively simple yet containing all the musical DNA from which the coming variations would evolve. Her touch was precise, controlled, yet somehow warm, a mathematician's mind expressing a poet's heart. As she progressed through the increasingly complex variations, technical brilliance gave way to something more profound, pure musical communication, unhindered by self-consciousness or external judgment. The audience sat transfixed, many with eyes closed, transported briefly from their difficult present into Bach's realm of ordered beauty. Even General Hoffman found himself leaning forward slightly, witnessing a side of his daughter he had never fully appreciated, not just technical competence, but genuine artistic presence. When the final notes of the concluding aria faded, there was a moment of complete silence before applause erupted, the audience rising spontaneously to their feet. Elsa acknowledged them with a formal bow, her expression composed though a hint of color touched her normally pale cheeks. As she made her way through congratulations afterward, Miller kept a respectful distance, watching as faculty members and officers alike expressed genuine appreciation. Even General Hoffman approached his daughter with uncharacteristic public approval, placing a formal kiss on her cheek before leading her toward the exit. It was only as they were leaving that Elsa caught Miller's eye across the room. No words were exchanged, but something passed between them, mutual recognition of what had been accomplished, both musically and symbolically. The concert's success generated unexpected momentum for the cultural reconstruction efforts. Higher authorities, impressed by reports of the event, authorized additional resources for the university's reopening. The small symbolic gesture had demonstrated tangible propaganda value, if nothing else. For Elsa, the performance marked a personal watershed. Having faced her fear of public presentation and found not rejection but appreciation, something shifted in her self-perception. She continued her archive work with new confidence, her suggestions becoming more assertive, her presence more definite. General Hoffman observed these changes with mixed emotions. His paternal pride in her success contended with concern over her growing independence and her obviously deepening connection with Captain Miller. "Professor Weber has asked me to consider teaching piano when the conservatory reopens," Elsa informed him over dinner one evening in late April. "Just a few advanced students initially." "Teaching," the general repeated, considering. "That would be appropriate, maintaining tradition." "I'm inclined to accept," she continued. "It would provide a small income. Things won't always be provided by the occupation forces." He nodded, surprisingly agreeable. "Practical considerations are important now. We must think of the future." "Yes," she agreed, studying him carefully. "We must." What remained unspoken was how differently they envisioned that future. For General Hoffman, survival meant maintaining what remained of traditional German identity until independence could be restored. For Elsa, the future was taking shape as something new, neither fully German nor American, but something that preserved essential values while discarding harmful divisions. May brought warmer weather and tentative green growth to Heidelberg's bomb-damaged landscape. The occupation settled into increasingly predictable patterns as both sides adjusted to indefinite coexistence. Cultural projects continued alongside security operations, parallel efforts rarely intersecting except through designated liaisons like Captain Miller. It was during this period that Miller received unexpected news, orders for reassignment to Berlin, where his academic background and cultural expertise were needed for larger-scale reconstruction planning. 3 weeks, he told Elsa, as they walked along the Philosopher's Way overlooking the city, a rare moment away from professional obligations. Then I transfer to the central administration. She absorbed this information silently, her face composed though her steps slowed slightly. "Berlin is where the important decisions are being made," she finally observed. "It's a promotion." "In a sense," he agreed, "though I've grown attached to our work here." They continued walking, the ancient path beneath their feet having witnessed centuries of philosophical discussions. Below them, the Neckar River flowed steadily onward, indifferent to human concerns. "Will you continue the archive work?" he asked. "Of course," she replied immediately. "It's too important to abandon, and the teaching position begins next month." She hesitated, then added, "Your replacement will be adequate, I assume?" "Lieutenant Peterson. He studied music at Juilliard before the war. He'll understand the significance of what we're preserving." They reached a stone bench overlooking a particularly fine view of the old bridge and castle ruins. By unspoken agreement, they sat, maintaining a proper distance between them, though both were acutely aware of the other's presence. "Elsa," Miller began, then paused, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Yes," she prompted, her voice carefully neutral. "These past months working together, they've meant a great deal to me." "To me as well," she acknowledged, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "When I first arrived here," he continued carefully, "I believed my purpose was simply professional, preserving cultural artifacts, facilitating reconstruction. I didn't expect to find—" "A friend?" she supplied when he hesitated. "More than that," he admitted quietly. She turned to face him directly, her grey eyes serious behind her spectacles. Captain Miller, Robert, we both know that more is complicated by 1,000 factors, our respective positions, your eventual return to America, the very recent conflict between our nations. All true, he acknowledged, and yet insufficient reasons to deny what has developed between us. And what is that? Exactly? She asked, not unkindly, but with characteristic directness. He considered his words carefully. Mutual respect, intellectual compatibility, and, I believe, genuine affection that could develop further given opportunity. A small smile touched her lips, very logically presented. I'm addressing a logical woman, he countered with a smile of his own. What would you propose, then? She asked, the question laden with multiple meanings. Correspondence, initially, he answered honestly. I'll be in Berlin, not disappearing entirely. Letters, visits when possible. Time to discover whether what we've found here can withstand separation and scrutiny. My father would be opposed, she noted, though without the definitive tone such a statement would have carried months earlier. I expect so, Miller agreed, though perhaps not forever. He's a pragmatist beneath his principles. She laughed softly at this assessment. You understand him better than most. I've had excellent reason to study him carefully, Miller replied, his expression warm. They sat in companionable silence for several moments, the spring breeze carrying the scent of new growth and distant flowering trees. I will write, she finally said, her decision made. And we shall see what develops from there. That seems the sensible approach. Sensible, he agreed, though his smile suggested deeper emotions beneath the practical surface. When the day of Miller's departure arrived, their formal goodbye took place in the university administrative office, witnessed by colleagues and staff. Professional handshakes, appropriate expressions of appreciation for services rendered, proper introductions to Lieutenant Peterson, who would continue the cultural affairs work. What no one witnessed was their private farewell the evening before, walking again along the Philosopher's Way, as sunset painted the ancient city in golden light. Heidelberg has survived for centuries, Miller observed, gazing at the castle ruins. Through religious wars, political upheavals, even our recent conflict. It endures because what matters most, knowledge, beauty, human connection, transcends the temporary divisions we create. Very philosophical, Elsa noted with a small smile. Appropriate for this path. I've become philosophical lately, he admitted. Finding unexpected meaning tends to prompt reflection. As twilight deepened around them, they spoke of practical matters, addresses for correspondence, potential visit dates, ongoing work requirements. Their conversation a careful architecture, built around the emotions neither quite trusted enough to express directly. When they finally parted at the path's end, their farewell was simple. A hand clasp that lingered slightly longer than convention dictated, a shared gaze that conveyed what words had not. Until Berlin, he said. Until Berlin, she echoed. General Hoffman observed his daughter closely following Miller's departure, expecting signs of distress or disappointment. Instead, he found her curiously energized, tackling her university responsibilities with new purpose while maintaining their household with efficient care. The arrival of the first letter from Berlin within a week of Miller's departure confirmed his suspicions. Elsa read it privately, saying nothing of its contents, though her expression as she carefully stored it in her desk drawer told its own story. I assume Captain Miller finds Berlin stimulating, the general remarked casually over dinner that evening. His letter mentioned extensive reconstruction challenges, she replied evenly. The cultural losses there were far greater than here. You intend to maintain this correspondence? He asked, the question careful rather than confrontational. She met his gaze directly. Yes, Father, I do. He considered this, weighing his response. He seems a decent man for an American, he finally conceded. Educational background, cultural appreciation, not the worst connection to maintain in current circumstances. It was as close to approval as she could have expected, and Elsa recognized the significant concession it represented from a man of her father's generation and position. Thank you, she said simply. The general nodded once, returning to his meal. Practical considerations must sometimes outweigh personal preferences. I've learned that much from recent years. Their quiet accommodation represented a microcosm of the larger adjustments occurring throughout occupied Germany. Pragmatic acceptance replacing ideological rigidity, cautious cooperation emerging from necessity rather than enthusiasm. Lieutenant Peterson proved competent, if not inspiring, in continuing the university archive work. Elsa maintained her commitment to the project while beginning her teaching position at the conservatory, finding unexpected satisfaction in guiding young pianists. Her performance at the reopening concert had created modest local reputation, bringing students eager to study with someone who had trained at Leipzig before the war. Throughout the summer of 1946, her correspondence with Miller continued, weekly letters exchanging professional news, cultural observations, and increasingly personal reflections. His position in Berlin's central administration provided broader perspective on occupation policies and reconstruction priorities, which he shared with appropriate discretion. In August, opportunity for reunion presented itself when cultural affairs officers throughout the occupation zones were summoned to Berlin for policy coordination meetings. Lieutenant Peterson would attend from Heidelberg, and as his cultural consultant, Elsa received official invitation to accompany him. 3 days in Berlin, she informed her father, presenting the travel authorization. The university provost believes my input would be valuable regarding musical manuscript preservation standards. General Hoffman studied the document carefully. Military transport provided. Accommodations at administration headquarters. Very official. He glanced up at his daughter, noting her carefully neutral expression. And Captain Miller will be there, of course. He's coordinating the cultural affairs portion of the conference, and she confirmed, neither denying nor emphasizing the connection. The general returned the papers with a small sigh. Berlin is much changed, I hear. Prepare yourself for difficult sights. I understand, she nodded. Thank you, Father. His acceptance, however reluctant, represented another small victory in their evolving relationship. The war and its aftermath had transformed them both. Him from rigid authority to pragmatic survivor, her from dutiful daughter to independent professional, finding her own path. The journey to Berlin in early September provided Elsa's first glimpse of wider German conditions beyond their relatively sheltered university town. The train passed through landscapes still scarred by conflict, bombed rail yards, collapsed bridges bypassed by temporary structures, fields only partially returned to agricultural use. Towns and villages showed varying states of reconstruction, some still largely rubble while others had managed significant rebuilding. Berlin itself presented the most profound shock. Vast stretches of the once imperial capital reduced to ruins, cleared paths creating transportation corridors through devastated neighborhoods. The administrative sector, where occupation headquarters had been established, maintained functional if austere conditions, but beyond its boundaries, civilians navigated a transformed urban landscape with practiced determination. Lieutenant Peterson, sensing Elsa's distress as their transport moved through the damaged city, commented quietly, "Captain Miller mentioned you hadn't seen Berlin since before. He wanted me to tell you it's improving monthly. Much has been cleared since spring." This well-intentioned reassurance only emphasized the catastrophic scale of destruction that improvement would require years to address. Elsa nodded acknowledgement, but remained silent, absorbing the visual evidence of how completely the world had changed. The Cultural Affairs Conference was housed in a former government building that had survived with minimal damage, its grand architecture now serving pragmatic occupation administration. Participants from various regions had begun arriving, creating a controlled bustle of activity as Elsa and Lieutenant Peterson checked in at the registration desk. It was there, in the marble-floored entrance hall, that she saw Miller for the first time since his departure from Heidelberg. He was engaged in conversation with several officers, a folder of documents open in his hands, his posture conveying the quiet authority she had come to know during their work together. He looked different somehow, more confident, perhaps, or simply more in his element in this administrative center. He glanced up, sensing observation, and their eyes met across the busy space. His expression shifted immediately, professional focus giving way to genuine pleasure, as he excused himself from his colleagues and approached. Fräulein Hoffmann, he greeted her with formal correctness, though his smile conveyed deeper meaning. Welcome to Berlin. I trust your journey was comfortable. As comfortable as current conditions allow, Captain Miller, she replied with matching formality, acutely aware of observers. Thank you for including the Heidelberg Cultural Office in these discussions. Your expertise is valuable, he responded, then nodded to her companion. Lieutenant Peterson, thank you for facilitating her participation. The afternoon orientation begins at 1400 hours. Perhaps you'd both like to refresh yourselves before then. The professional choreography continued through the conference's opening sessions, their interaction limited to brief exchanges in group settings. It was only during the evening reception that opportunity for private conversation presented itself, as participants circulated through the formal dining room that had been converted to a modest social space. You've seen the city, Miller observed quietly, as they found themselves momentarily isolated near tall windows overlooking the darkened administrative complex. Yes, she acknowledged, it's difficult to comprehend. The human capacity for destruction, he nodded, understanding her meaning. And for survival, both are on display here. Your letters mentioned reconstruction progress, but seeing the scale directly. I wanted to prepare you, he admitted, but some things defy description. She studied him carefully in the subdued lighting. Berlin has changed you somewhat. A small smile touched his lips. Observant as always. How so? More. Assured, perhaps. More comfortable in your administrative role. Necessity, he explained. The work here requires certain adaptations, but the essentials remain unchanged. His gaze held hers steadily, including what matters most to me personally. Before she could respond, they were rejoined by colleagues, the moment of privacy passing. Yet something had been confirmed between them. Continuity despite changed circumstances. Connection maintained across separation. The conference proceeded through 2 days of detailed discussions on cultural preservation policies, repatriation of displaced artifacts, and standardization of archival procedures across occupation zones. Elsa contributed substantively to sessions on musical manuscript conservation, her expertise respected by American and German participants alike. Miller maintained professional distance during formal proceedings while finding brief opportunities for personal connection, a shared coffee during breaks, a moment of conversation while reviewing documentation, a walking escort between conference venues that allowed precious minutes of privacy. I've arranged a small expedition for tomorrow morning, he informed her during one such interval. Before your afternoon train, there's something I'd like you to see. The following morning, a military vehicle collected Elsa from the conference accommodations. Miller waited beside it, dressed not in his usual uniform but in civilian clothes, a simple sweater and trousers that emphasized his academic background rather than military position. Where are we going? She asked, as they navigated the cleared routes through the damaged city. Tiergarten, he replied, or what remains of it. The once magnificent park had suffered terribly during the final battle for Berlin and subsequent occupation, its trees cut for firewood during desperate winter months, its landscape scarred by defensive positions and artillery impacts. Yet as they parked and continued on foot, Elsa was surprised to discover an island of recovery amid devastation, a small section where new saplings had been planted in neat rows, spring flowers now faded, but evidence of intentional restoration. The Botanical Rehabilitation Project, Miller explained as they walked a cleared path, started in March. It will take decades for the trees to mature, of course, but the symbolism matters now. They reached the center of the restored area, where several stone benches had been arranged, creating a small contemplative space. Morning sunlight filtered through the sparse foliage of young trees, dappling the ground with shifting patterns. I come here to think, Miller admitted as they sat. Amid all the administrative demands and political complexities, this reminds me why any of it matters. Renewal, Elsa observed softly, understanding immediately. Exactly. He turned slightly to face her directly. Elsa, I've respected the careful pace of our correspondence, the gradual exploration of what might be possible between us. But seeing you again these past days has confirmed what I've known since Heidelberg. She met his gaze steadily. And what is that, Robert? That what we've found is rare and valuable, he answered simply, worth preserving and nurturing, like these new plantings, something that could grow into something magnificent, given time and care. She was silent for a moment, her expression thoughtful rather than hesitant. You know there would be substantial obstacles, professional complications, family resistance, cultural differences. Yes, he acknowledged, and practical considerations too. My eventual return to America, your established life here. I've thought through all of it, believe me. As have I, she admitted with a small smile. And, he prompted gently. And I believe some connections transcend conventional wisdom, she replied. Just as Bach transcends national boundaries, certain human bonds exceed the limitations others would place upon them. His smile broadened at her characteristically thoughtful response. Beautifully expressed. I am a musician, she reminded him with unexpected lightness. Expression is my field. In that moment of shared understanding, among the tentative new growth of a devastated city, something definitive formed between them, not just possibility but commitment to exploring it fully, whatever challenges might come. Their parting at the train station that afternoon carried none of the uncertainty of their Heidelberg farewell. Lieutenant Peterson discreetly occupied himself with luggage arrangements, allowing them a moment of semi-privacy on the crowded platform. 2 weeks, Miller confirmed. I'll have leave to visit Heidelberg for the university committee meeting. We can continue our discussion then. I'll have prepared some thoughts, Elsa promised with the hint of a smile. I would expect nothing less, he replied warmly. The journey back to Heidelberg gave Elsa time to consider how to approach her father. The general's pragmatic acceptance of their correspondence had been a significant concession, but the deeper connection developing with Miller would require more difficult conversations. She found unexpected opportunity the evening of her return, as they sat in the general's study after dinner, the autumn evening turning chilly outside, though fuel conservation kept the room barely comfortable. Berlin is firmly under their control, then? The general asked, his interest professional rather than provocative. Firmly administered, she confirmed. Though conditions remain difficult for most civilians, the contrasts are stark between administrative sectors and ordinary neighborhoods. He nodded, having expected nothing different. And the American cultural priorities, still focused on denazification rather than true preservation. The policies are evolving, she replied carefully. Captain Miller has been influential in emphasizing genuine cultural conservation alongside political concerns. Miller again, the general observed, studying his daughter closely. You saw him, I presume. He coordinated the conference, she acknowledged, meeting his gaze steadily. We had several opportunities to speak privately. The general was silent for a moment, weighing his response. Finally, he sighed slightly. Elsa, I am not blind, nor am I becoming senile. I recognize what is developing, however unlikely I might have considered it a year ago. She blinked, surprised by his directness. Father, He raised a hand, interrupting gently. Let me finish. When I arranged that dinner party last December, I intended to embarrass the American captain by confronting him with my unmarriageable, academically focused daughter. I believed he would react, as every German officer and official had, with polite discomfort and barely disguised relief when the evening ended. Elsa remained silent, letting him continue this unexpected confession. Instead, the general continued, he saw what I had failed to value properly. Your intelligence, your talent, your character. He recognized quality where I had seen only disappointment. His voice softened slightly. For that alone, I would have to acknowledge him as an unusual man, enemy or not. He is unusual, she agreed quietly. As, perhaps, am I. A small smile touched the general's lined face. Indeed, perhaps that explains the unexpected compatibility. He straightened in his chair, his expression becoming more practical. Now, what exactly are his intentions? He is an American officer who will eventually return home. These are not trivial considerations. We are still determining possibilities, she answered honestly. His current assignment extends at least another year. Beyond that, there are various options we've begun to discuss. Options? The General repeated, considering the word. Including your potential relocation to America? Potentially, she acknowledged, though there might be academic opportunities for him in Europe as well once civilian administration resumes. He was a professor before the war. The General nodded slowly. A respectable profession. Not wealthy, but stable. They were discussing practical aspects of a relationship neither had explicitly acknowledged was happening, a characteristically German approach that struck Elsa as both absurd and touching. "Father," she said gently, "are you giving your blessing to a connection you originally intended to prevent?" He considered this for a moment, then offered a small, wry smile. "I am acknowledging that my beautiful, talented daughter deserves happiness with someone who truly appreciates her worth. If that person happens to be an American professor, temporarily in uniform, well, the world has delivered many more improbable outcomes in recent years, has it not?" It was the first time in her memory that he had called her beautiful without qualification or irony. The significance was not lost on her as she reached across to cover his hand with her own. "Thank you," she said simply. When Captain Miller arrived in Heidelberg 2 weeks later for the university committee meeting, he found a significantly evolved situation. General Hoffman, rather than maintaining cold formality, invited him to dinner at their home, not as an occupation authority, but as his daughter's suitor, a distinction that transformed the entire interaction. "My daughter tells me you were a professor of European literature," the General remarked as they sat in his study after the meal, the atmosphere markedly different from their first such encounter. "At Columbia University," Miller confirmed, "specializing in German Romanticism, actually. Goethe, Schiller, Hölderlin. Good German writers," the General nodded approval. Proper cultural education. Elsa, observing this careful male negotiation with private amusement, recognized it for what it was. Her father's tentative extension of acceptance, Miller's respectful acknowledgement of paternal authority. Traditional courtship rituals playing out amid the most non-traditional circumstances imaginable. As autumn progressed toward winter, their relationship developed within the constraints of separation and professional obligations. Miller visited Heidelberg when administrative duties permitted. Elsa occasionally traveled to Berlin for cultural consultation, their growing connection becoming cautiously accepted within their professional circles. By December, 1 year after their first meeting at the General's dinner party, they had progressed from theoretical discussions to practical planning. Miller had received preliminary approval for civilian academic assignment once his military service concluded the following summer, potentially at Heidelberg's reopening university if German academic authorities approved. A visiting professorship initially, he explained during a December walk along the Philosopher's Way, their path now familiar territory, with potential for permanent position as civilian administration normalizes. "And if that doesn't materialize?" Elsa asked practically. "Then I return to Columbia," he replied, "with the hope that you would consider joining me there." She nodded thoughtfully. "I've been corresponding with the music department chair at Barnard College. There might be teaching opportunities, though credentials would need evaluation." The matter-of-fact way they discussed potential life transformation spoke volumes about their shared practical nature, romantic in their connection, but logical in its implementation. Neither was given to impulsive decisions or unrealistic expectations. It was during this conversation that Miller finally asked the question that had been forming for months, not on bended knee or with dramatic flourish, but with characteristic, thoughtful directness as they stood overlooking the river valley. "Elsa Hoffman," he said, taking her gloved hands in his, "or would you consider marriage to an unusual American who recognizes your extraordinary worth and wishes to build a future together, wherever that might take us?" She studied him with those intense grey eyes, a small smile forming. "I would consider it very seriously, Robert Miller. In fact, I believe I've already reached a favorable conclusion to that consideration." He laughed softly at her characteristically precise response. "Is that a yes?" "It is a definitive affirmative," she confirmed, her smile broadening. Their engagement announcement was met with varied reactions, surprise from many colleagues who had observed their professional relationship without recognizing its deeper development, knowing nods from closer associates who had witnessed their connection evolve, cautious congratulations from military authorities concerned with fraternization policies, but willing to make exceptions for an officer of Miller's standing. General Hoffman's response when they informed him that evening was a model of pragmatic acceptance. "Well," he said after a moment's consideration, "at least he appreciates Bach properly. That's not a small matter in a son-in-law." They were married the following April in a small ceremony at Heidelberg's University Chapel, a symbolic location representing their shared commitment to cultural preservation and academic values. The audience was appropriately mixed: American officers in formal uniform, German academics in their best available attire, a few carefully selected friends from both worlds. As they exchanged vows in that ancient space that had witnessed centuries of European history, the significance of their union extended beyond personal connection. In a small but meaningful way, they represented possibility amid devastation, the human capacity for finding connection across divisions, for building rather than destroying, for recognizing value beyond superficial judgment. When Captain Robert Miller removed his uniform for the last time that summer, returning to civilian academic life as Professor Miller of Heidelberg University's restored literature department, the transition seemed natural rather than abrupt. His military service had been honorable and significant, but teaching had always been his true vocation. For Elsa Hoffman Miller, the university's piano department provided a professional home where her talents were finally properly valued. Her occasional public performances became respected cultural events, her technical precision and emotional depth drawing appreciative audiences no longer concerned with conventional standards of presentation. General Friedrich Hoffmann, watching his daughter build an unexpected life with her American husband, gradually discovered a perspective he had never anticipated, seeing Germany's future through new eyes, recognizing possibilities in cooperation rather than isolation. His initial scheme to humiliate an occupation officer had instead opened doorways of understanding that transformed 3 lives and touched many more. Years later, when the Millers' children asked how their parents had met, the story would be shared with gentle humor. How a German general had sent his ugly daughter as a joke, only to discover that she was exactly what the American soldier had always wanted, a person of substance, intelligence, and genuine beauty that transcended superficial standards. Their unlikely connection, born amid the ruins of conflict, offered modest testimony to the human capacity for recognizing true value beyond appearance, nationality, or circumstance. A small but significant victory for discernment in a world too often governed by quick judgment and artificial division. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.